Hi everyone, in this video the plan is to give a quick review of one of May's Aeroclassics releases, in this case the Northwest Airlines Douglas DC-9-51. Just like my reviews at modelairliner.com, I'll split the review into three sections, one for the mould, one for the livery and one for printing and construction. Each section gets a score of 10 for a maximum combined score of 30. So let's get started with this DC-9. Firstly, let's take a look at the mould. Now, if you're buying Aeroclassics, the DC-9 is one of their best. And if you're buying DC-9s, you haven't really got a lot of choice because nobody else is making them in 2020. But even looking back over the history of the mould for the type, the Aeroclassics DC-9 is clearly the best. One of the best aspects about it is the shape of the nose. None of the other moulds get this correct. If it's a Seattle mould, then the nose is a bit Snoopy-like. If it's the Gemini Jets mould, which has been used by a whole variety of other manufacturers over time, then the nose is too slanted, more like a Concorde almost, down from the cockpit. It is the Aeroclassics DC-9 which has far and away the best nose. The rest of the fuselage is excellent. It's got really nice wings, good size engines, everything's in the right place. There's a small seam around the wing where they join the fuselage. Nothing to write home about, doesn't really have any impact on the mould. Obviously there aren't any aerials, but not really a big problem for a DC-9 anyway. Effectively, this is a near perfect representation of the type. Just as good as their shorter DC-9-31 mould. I think this pretty much deserves a 10 out of 10. Moving on to the livery, and obviously this is in the 1990s bowling shoe scheme. It's got the slightly later version of the scheme with the KLM Northwest Working Together logo after the titles. In general, most of the livery elements are in the right place. It's got the large flag under the titles on the belly. It's got the right proportions of white, grey, dark blue, is it purple? I can never really tell, and red. Tail logo's in the right place. Aeroclassics has done their homework this time. They've got the right fleet number, both at the rear and also down here under the cockpit. Maybe slightly too low, but yeah, who's going to argue it's a tiny difference? So in terms of placement of the livery items, I think, yeah, pretty much spot on there. I can't really see any issues. When it comes to the colour, however, then obviously it looks like there are a couple of issues. And Aeroclassics typically spend too much time getting the colours wrong, especially when it comes to reds. Much like JC Wings, they're usually just too dark, and in this case, this is pretty dark. I mean, let's compare it to some other bowling shoe aircraft that I have in the fleet. So I've got another Aeroclassics model here, that's an A319. And you can see, even in comparison to this previous Aeroclassics release, the red is darker and the grey is darker. Now, if I compare it to a Gemini Jet 757, which has pretty decent colours, again, you can see both the grey and the red are substantially darker. This is another Aeroclassics, a more recent one, DC-10. Again, the red and the grey are darker. I don't know why Aeroclassics couldn't match the grey and the red to their previous releases, which even themselves are perhaps slightly too dark, but not really dark enough to worry about. Comparing to this very old Gemini DC-9, and you can clearly see, incidentally, the inferior nose shape on this. The colours are way darker, but I think that Gemini have even got the colours a bit too light with their DC-9. So I would have to say, yeah, the colours are too dark. I'm going to knock a couple of points off of that. Let's give it an 8. Most of the livery is in the right place, but the colours are wrong. Okay, on to printing and construction. There's not a huge amount of printing detail. It's pretty good. I mean, the DC-9s don't have a huge amount of bits and bobs to print, to be honest. Aeroclassics printing's generally pretty solid, reliable, but at the same time, nothing to shout about. Certainly not up to the same standards as NG models or JC Wings or Panda, actually. But there's nothing wrong with it, except for the cockpit windows. Aeroclassics has for some time been a bit hit and miss printing cockpit windows on DC-9s and 727s, and you can see here that the cockpit windows are slightly too low. It doesn't look too bad, but if I can get this to focus, you can see they're slightly drooping down the nose cone. It perhaps is more obvious if you compare it to another model. This is also an Aeroclassics DC-9-51, actually also Northwest, made earlier, and you can see that the cockpit windows are better positioned on the older release. So I don't really understand why they can't get this right now when they could get it right in the past, but you can see that the cockpit windows are a little bit too low. It doesn't actually have a drastic effect on this model. They've done far worse on some of their DC-9s. Kenya Airways springs to mind, but it isn't right. It's not ideal. I think that, yeah, it's probably knocking a couple of points off, to be honest, as well. So we'll give it an 8 also for the printing. You can see that there's no issues with the construction. It's a quite simple mould. There's not a lot of extra pieces. You've got the undercarriage, obviously, and the tail, and the wings, and the fuselage, and the engines, and that's about it. Everything's on, everything's firmly connected, no problems with the build quality. So overall, what do I think of this model? Yeah, it's pretty good, but it's kind of up to the sort of standard you get from Aeroclassics in 2020. It's good, it's not spectacular, it's not perfect, but it's reliable, it's solid. You might be put off by the colour. It's not that bad. The cockpit windows, they're not that bad, but they're not great. So it's lost 4 marks overall for a score of 26, which puts it firmly in the pretty decent category. Can't really argue too much with Aeroclassics DC-9s. No one else is making them, and I'm a bit of a sucker for them. It's a decent effort here, I think, and sits pretty well with my bowling shoe aircraft, regardless of the colour difference.